Hi, it's Steve with Palladino Power Project, bringing another video in my series on CP and FTP for runners. I'm going a little bit off of my previously presented order of videos, uh, and this time I'm going to bring you part two, which is not the part two that I was planning on, but it's still nevertheless one that I wanted to talk about, and that's the pros and cons of using a race to help estimate your critical power. A lot of athletes like using races to uh, input into their multi-parameter power duration model or other models and use that to supplement their CP estimate. I want to talk about the pros and cons of doing that. So the first one is pros, and that's pretty straightforward. When you go to a race, it's a maximal effort in most cases, and there's motivation, there's competition, so it brings the best out in you. Now, um, I want to emphasize maximal effort because A races and B races do require maximal effort. A C race is one where you go to a race and are just executing at a lower intensity. You're using it for training purposes. It's not full effort. So a C race is not going to do anything for your CP estimate. It's not going to do anything for your power duration curve. So I'm in this video, I'm talking about A races and B races. Now, the difference between A race and B race is primarily the type of taper, the amount of taper. So a B race is an incomplete taper. You just, might be 1 day, 2 days, and then you're hitting it hard in the race, and then you're back to training. Where an A race is that's what you have been training for, and you're going to do a full complete taper that results in a much more positive training stress balance, or RSB if you're in the stride ecosystem, and a negative CTL or chronic training load ramp rate for at least 1 to 5 days, where in a B race, you want that CTL ramp rate to be positive to no more than zero, no more positive than zero, ideally. So we are, in this case, the pros of running a race to help estimate your CP is that it has to be it has to be maximal effort, not a C race. But when you do run maximal effort, B race or A race, and there's that motivation and competition, it brings out that little more in you than if you were doing a solo time trial on a track or on a path somewhere. You're going to get high performance data that feeds a model with that quality data. So that's the pros. Let's talk about the cons. And the first one is a relativity concept. And I want to talk about this too much performance. We want high performance, but can you get too much? So you'll have runners that will say, I don't test well and I prefer races. So they don't do the time trials and they'll go to, say, a park run or whatever, an organized race where there is a competition, there is the motivation, there are other people that encourage you along, and they do perform better. So here's an example where instead of a 20-minute test where they might have performed at 280 watts, it's about 3% higher maybe in a park run where they ran 22 minutes. So that's great. Thumbs up. You achieved what you said. You prefer races. It motivates you. You got more power out of yourself. Well, the if you drop that into your multi-parameter power duration curve or other models, this test, solo time trial, might bump your CP to this 270 to 274 watt range. All right. Whereas this one, 3% higher power, bumps your CP up into the 279 to 282 watt range. And then now you have this new CP, and you're going to go back and train with that CP. And so then you'll see in some cases, not all, in some cases they'll go, well, I think my CP is overestimated. My targets feel too hard. Well, because you're training in your non-motivated, non-competitive environment, but you raced in this motivated, competitive environment. So if you are one of these people that really drags a lot and gets a lot more out of yourself in a race, and it leads to a overestimated CP or CP that's a little bit overestimated relative to what your training targets are going to be executed in, your unmotivated state maybe, then you got to be aware of this. So be careful. That's one potential con, and it happens with some people. And so along this line, remember the objective in training with power and training with a CP, critical power number, is not necessarily get the highest estimate possible. It's to get the most valid CP estimate for the purpose and conditions in which the estimates might be employed. So what I'm trying to say here is you want to have a CP estimate. If you're going to be training, then you want to have a CP estimate that is valid for your training. If it's you're doing this testing and it's to get a CP that's useful for your A race, then okay, now it's useful and applicable to your A race. But keep in mind, it's not necessarily the highest CP estimate you're after. Yeah, you want to do a good job at executing your testing, but it's got to be valid for the purposes and conditions in which you're going to employ that CP estimate. The next one is, are there shoe or air power differences? So some people will bring out their fancy race shoes when they go to the race. Maybe they bring their vapor fly with the angled laces and the pod is oriented off towards your fifth toe, and you get lower air power. So is that data that you're getting from that race going to be applicable to the shoe and the conditions in which you're going to be training? All right, so this goes to a slide that I've presented elsewhere. What's the purpose of your tests? If it's to provide training targets, you're in a training block, then if you're going to the race, wear your typical training shoes. Now, you don't have, if you have a pair of plodding shoes for your easy runs and a pair of a little bit faster shoes for your tempos and intervals, and then you have your race shoes, you're going to wear your tempo interval shoes to get good training targets, all right? Whereas if you're planning for an A race, your last few testing sessions, then you might want to use your shoes that you wear on race day, all right? And that way you get something a little bit more applicable. Again, be aware of shoe differences, but in particular, air power differences. If you wear those angle lace shoes and you're going to get a erroneously low air power, it's going to give you an underestimated CP relative to what you would get in a straight laced shoe. All right, so keep that in mind. Next one, you have to sort of know your model, and there are potential issues with doing race data and you providing that to a multi-parameter power duration model. The first one I wanted to mention, the first issue, is that if you're using a multi-parameter power duration model, which the stride model is, the stride model that provides auto CP is a multi-parameter power duration model. WKO and model FTP, same thing, Golden Cheetah, they're all multi-parameter power duration models. Well, keep in mind that if you're plugging in 5K, 10K, 20-minute, 40-minute data into the model, and you're not plugging in data in the 2 to 3 minute domain, you're going to have an overestimated auto CP. And that's because of something that Dr. Coggin, Andy Coggin, coined this term, the teeter-totter effect, when it applies to a multi-parameter power duration model. And there's other models. But a multi-parameter power duration model is going to put out two primary outputs, critical power and W prime, which I call reserve work capacity, RWC. It puts out two outputs, and any data that's provided to the model, it has to reconcile those two outputs. New power PBs in the domain that's about 3 minutes and less is going to leverage reserve work capacity up. New power PBs in the domain of about 8 minutes and higher, maybe up to an hour, is going to leverage critical power up. All right? If you have great race data in this longer duration domain, middle to longer duration domain, and you don't have something to balance it off, you're going to have a problem. You're going to have an overestimated CP. All right? So if the 5K to 10K races that you run are not balanced with a test in the 2 to 3 minute domain, your model, your stride model or WKO model or Golden Cheetah model is going to provide a CP that's somewhat overestimated. All right? So you got to provide the right data. All right, the next issue with racing and multi-parameter power duration models is the concept of leverage. All right? So we sort of touched on that in that previous slide of the teeter-totter effect. And there's leverage. There's leverage for CP, and there's leverage for reserve work capacity. You need both of them to get a valid CP. But I want to talk a little bit about this leverage here for leveraging your CP. And notice that leverage, they're sort of a prime area, about 20 to 40 minutes. And then as you get longer, it leverages CP less. Or if you start getting shorter, you just work your way towards where RWC is leveraging, it's not going to leverage your CP, right? It sort of, there's a taper, there's a primary leverage area for impacting CP. So the reason I bring this up is that if you run a marathon, it's going to have no leverage on your CP. It's out here. It's not going to leverage your CP. It's going to have no effect. If you run a half marathon and you're under an hour and 10, close to an hour and 10, it may have a small effect on your CP. In other words, it may leverage your CP a little bit. But if it's longer than about an hour and 10, maybe just over an hour and 10, if it's longer, it's going to have no effect on your multi-parameter power duration CP estimate. So that's part two. If you're running races that are too long, they're going to have no effect. If you're running races that are too short effect, they may even leverage the opposite way. You go and run a mile race, and you're 5:30 miler. Um, that has a potential of leveraging your CP down because it's leveraging RWC W prime up. All right. So realize that you're dealing with a multi-parameter power duration model if you're using the stride model, right? And the protocol, the data, type of data, and the frequency of the data that you're entering into that model is going to impact. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a spot on valid CP estimate, right? So if you are entering a half marathon and you ran a PB half marathon and it's an hour and 20 minutes, you input it into that multi-parameter power duration model, it's not going to have an effect on FTP. So if you don't have any other testing and you just ran a half marathon power PB, your CP in that model may be underestimated. Conversely, if you ran a 5K, run a bunch of 5Ks and 10Ks, but you don't have that 3 minute or 2 to 3 minute domain maximum effort test to input into that model, your CP is going to be a bit overestimated. So keep in mind that if what you're running in terms of racing and how it impacts or how it plays with that model that you're using. If you're using a multi-parameter power duration model and you're running 5K, 10Ks, you need to balance it out with other testing in the 2 to 3 minute domain to get a valid CP estimate. All right, just bringing you back to this slide. If you're running these, you better balance it with these to get a valid CP estimate from the multi-parameter power duration model. If it's a half marathon or full marathon, realize that unless you're a really fast half marathoner, and certainly any full marathon, it's not going to leverage this. It's not going to leverage that. So you have to use an alternative model, and there are some, like the ones I built for Final Surge, the models I built for them, where you can input longer race data. And here's the examples that I have in Final Surge of the model, the calculators that I've built. One for races that are over about 40 minutes, longer than that. So half marathon or marathon certainly would go in there. Longer 10Ks can go in there. And another model that gives you an independent estimate of your CP outside of the power duration model for races that are less than about 40 minutes, less than equal to about 40 minutes. To get these models, you have to be Final Surge. You have to have a Final Surge account, which is free for athletes. You go to your calendar in the beta mode. There's these icons. You click on the calculators, click on My tab here, and a bunch of calculators will unfold, including these two. And this one's based on the Rigel formula and the exponent as a table. If you click on that reference table, it's going to take your race data here that you've entered, your time and your average power, and you click on that table. It gives you which range of Rigel exponents and provides you with a CP estimate range from that long race data. Same thing over here for short races. Let's say it's a 10K or 5K. You enter your time in minutes and seconds and your average power. Click that. It'll give you an estimated range for your CP. All right. And you can use that to balance what you're seeing in your multi-parameter power duration model. It gives you another look at your CP. All right. There are links to videos that I've done on each of these particular models. I'll put that in the description of this video for you, or each of those videos. All right. One thing about these two models is they do not provide you with a reserve work capacity estimate, or W prime. Neither does Stride's power duration model, the auto CP model. You don't get a reserve work capacity estimate provided, even though the model is calculating your reserve work capacity. The Stride model, they don't report it. So the reason I put this here, this gives you an estimate for your CP, but not necessarily for your reserve work capacity. You need something like a linear 1 over time CP model for that. And you need short duration, 2 to 3 minute domain, and medium, 8 to 12 minute, or longer, 20 to 40 minute domain to get that reserve work capacity estimate. The reason I mention this is that if you like using the Final Surge calculator that I have for calculating individualized interval power targets based on your CP and RWC, you need RWC. So these models here, based on just your single race data, does not provide you with RWC, but it does allow you to get a feel for where your CP is. The last one I want to talk about in terms of cons is lingering fatigue in the days and weeks following a race. So that is a reality, but it varies depending on your race. Now, I've talked about this concept before. I did a video where I talked about it. I'll put the link for that video in the description of this video. And then I also wrote an article that goes over some of the data I'm about to present you. The training stress of races as a percentage of chronic training load. And I'll put that link in the description of this video. So basically, when you run a race, there is a certain load associated with it. I did a study of athletes that I coach, and here's the number of race samples that I used. And this ran from recreational racers to sub-elites. And the average percent of chronic training load, that would be 42-day average if you're in the Stride ecosystem, is about 77%. All right, that would be a 5K with the standard deviation. So 99 down to about 55. All right, percent of CTL. Notice it goes up as you'd expect. The load goes up as the race distance. Now, here's another depiction of the same data in a bar diagram. And it's essentially, you look here and you can see the load goes up. About 253 for a half marathon, 415% of chronic training load with a marathon, 127%. So now let's bring that back into context. And here's an athlete that was training for a marathon. So these are sizable long runs that were around in the 280, 290, 300% of chronic training load level. The small bars here are all easy runs, and they're all less than 100% or pretty close to it. And then these medium bars here are tempo interval workouts, midweek typically. And they were generally in over 150 up to about 200%. So that gives you context so that if you're doing a 5K is as a test, that's no more than most of your training days. And a 10K, even a 10K is not much more than a hard interval or tempo workout. right, in terms of load. And I'm counting a warm up and cool down of your workout, right? So the bounce back is going to be easier for a 5K, a little bit harder for 10K. A half marathon now, this could be more load than some people's long runs, right? So now you got to go, oh wow, I have a half marathon, and also I'm doing it max effort. What's the bounce back on that? So in general, I like to keep people 5K, 10Ks as testing. Half marathon, not so much, unless they're a faster runner with a higher load, so they're going to bounce back quicker. And even then, after half marathon, I'll give them some recovery days that they're not in right back into the regular training program. And then I'll also understand that I'll use one of my independent calculators to estimate their CP from that half marathon, and not solely rely on a multi-parameter power duration model. All right, so a little bit more about some of the testing protocols that you see in the plans. So a stride plan format, this is what it looks like. It's a 3-minute followed by a weekend 20-minute or 5-minute or 5K race, 20-minute time trial, 5K race. And then about 4 weeks later, another 3-minute, with this time with a 10-minute. So we're covering the short domain, the middle domain, and the longer domain in this protocol on an ongoing basis. So it keeps the CP frequent and updated and currently valid. Same thing with the final surge plan format. I use on one weekend, I'll do ask for a 3-minute, 12-minute formal CP test. That allows us to get that a good RWC from a linear 1/time model, and then a 20-minute or 5K about 4 weeks later. All right, and it sort of alternates back and forth like that. So those are how the plan formats are. Keep in mind that if you're, let's say, in the stride format, and you say, I want to do a half marathon right here, understand your half marathon's not going to have any, probably not going to have any impact on your stride power duration model. It is going to create lingering fatigue, so you better watch that other video about preemptively putting in a recovery week here in the plan. So you got to be careful with what you're subbing in. So if you decided to do a 20-minute or 5K here, another, let's say this is a park run, another park run down here, as long as you're doing these, you're probably okay. Your CP will be pretty valid by subbing in a 20-minute or 5K, even if you went 10K here. But then if you went 10K here, you got to worry about when's your next big interval workout. So you may have to modify your plan or preemptively put in an alternative type of week here. All right. So when I coach people one-on-one, more individualized format, I might get a 3-minute and 12-minute CP test midweek instead of an interval workout. And this is, remember, this kind of testing right here is it is max aerobic power, VO2 max type of training, but it's in a testing format. So I might do that, but let's say we have a 5K or 10K, scheduled about 5 or 6 weeks, which I really like. I will maybe ahead of this, remember this is a B race, I may have them do an 800-meter time trial or 1K time trial, 3 minutes earlier in the week, maybe Tuesday or Wednesday prior to doing this, just so I can keep the RWC CP in balance and get a valid CP estimate. Yeah, if you're an athlete, you're doing race only format. You do a 10K, your CP is going to be pretty close, maybe overestimated because you don't have that short duration. You do the 5K, yeah, that's gonna update your CP probably, but might be overestimated because you don't have the short duration. You do this half marathon, and it's not going to have any effect if you're a slower runner. Um, you're not. It's not going to have any effect on your CP validity, and it's only going to, it's probably going to make you fatigued. So the following week is going to be problematic, higher risk of injury. So you make sure that you account for that. So avoid a race only format unless one of your races is at 800 meters back here in the middle of the week, or maybe here, maybe that's an 800 meter or even up to a mile. All right, then you're probably okay. So let's summarize this. The pros and cons. The pros, it's clear. You're going to get a really good, solid, maximal effort. There's competition, there's motivation. So you're going to get high performance and quality data. That's the pro. That's why we're doing racing, to help find out what your CP is, or bolster the validity of your CP estimate. But realize there are these cons. Are you one of these people where you taper too much for a B race and you're really jazzed up and you get a really good performance, and it's not representative of what you're capable of in training? Are you a person that brings your fancy racing shoes, your vapor flies, and it's angled off, and you're getting low air power, you're erroneously low air power, and you're not getting a good CP estimate because of that? It's not representative of what you're going to be using in training? Consider these things, all right? Yes, use racing, but consider these things. Also, know your model or models. Know that you have to balance your races with short duration testing at some point in relative proximity of your B race. And also realize that there's a leverage effect, so that if you're using half marathon, a half marathon, it's not going to leverage your multi-parameter power duration model. And lastly, keep in mind lingering fatigue. Yeah, it's great to get out there and really charge a great race and really get a good effort in, but you're going to pay the price in the following days, and you got to account for that. So be careful with that. So my feeling is, yes, let's get racing. It motivates. It's the carrot. It's good stuff. But let's do it at appropriate frequency. Let's account for the fatigue following the race. Let's try to use a race duration or distance that's going to leverage the model properly on the CP side, and let's balance it by doing some short duration testing. So thank you for watching. We'll catch you next time in this series, keep on coming back. We'll bring some more to you. Bye-bye.